There will be a moment, months into your healing, when a name you thought you'd finally stopped flinching at shows up on your phone again, out of nowhere. No warning, no pattern you can trace back to anything you did. And the timing is going to feel almost too precise to be a coincidence, because it is not a coincidence. It's arriving exactly when it's arriving for a reason, and understanding that reason is going to change everything about how you interpret it when it happens, or if it already has. Here's what almost nobody explains clearly about why narcissists come back, and I mean really explains, not just the surface level idea that they miss you or realize what they lost. Because that framing, as comforting as it might sound in a weak moment, is almost never what's actually happening. What's actually happening is something far more specific, far more mechanical, and honestly, far less about you as a person than you'd expect. A narcissist doesn't come back because your healing made you irresistible in some romantic storybook sense. They come back because your healing did something to the signal you were sending out into the world, and that signal, once it shifts enough, becomes something their entire psychological system is built to chase. So let's really break this down, because once you understand the mechanics behind this pattern, that sudden reappearance stops feeling mysterious or flattering and starts making a very different kind of sense. The first thing you need to understand is what your pain was actually doing for them while you were still in it. When you were hurting, when you were reaching out, when you were still visibly, openly affected by what happened between you, you were, without meaning to be, still functioning as a source. Your sadness was proof of their impact. Your confusion was proof of their power. Even your anger, as uncomfortable as it might have felt to sit in, was still, in their eyes, a form of ongoing connection, because as long as you were emotionally activated by them in any direction, you were still, in some sense, tethered to their existence. This is one of the hardest things to accept about this dynamic, but it's essential to understand fully. Your grief, your confusion, your hope that they'd change, all of it, however painful, was still supply. It was still evidence that you hadn't moved past them, hadn't found stability without them, hadn't rebuilt a version of yourself that didn't include the shape of their absence. And then something shifted, slowly, maybe without you even fully noticing it happening in real time. Your healing started to change the signal. You stopped checking your phone every few minutes hoping it was them. You stopped rehearsing the conversation where they finally understood what they did. You started sleeping through the night again. You started laughing at things that had nothing to do with them, around people who had nothing to do with them, building a life that piece by piece stopped orbiting around the space they used to occupy. And here's the part that explains everything that happens next. To a narcissist, that shift doesn't read as good news for you. It reads as a disappearance of the connection they've come to rely on, even if they haven't spoken to you in months, even if they told everyone they were completely over it, completely fine, completely moved on. Because remember, their sense of impact isn't measured by whether the relationship is technically active. It's measured by whether they still occupy space in your internal world. And your healing, real healing, is precisely the thing that starts to close that space. This brings us to the second thing that happens, and it's where the actual mechanics of coming back begin to take shape. As your healing progresses, as the signal you're sending out into the world, sometimes literally through social media, sometimes just through mutual friends, sometimes simply through the version of you that shows up in shared spaces, starts to shift from broken to steady, from reactive to calm, from someone visibly struggling to someone who looks unmistakably like they're doing well. Something in the narcissist's system registers this as a loss event. Not a loss of you specifically, in the way a healthy person would grieve losing someone they loved. A loss of access, a loss of relevance, a loss of the certainty that, whenever they wanted to, they could reach back into your life and stir something, anything, because you were still emotionally available to be stirred. Your calm, your visible stability, your apparent indifference to their existence, all of it reads as a door quietly closing, And for someone whose entire identity depends on believing every door stays open indefinitely, that closing door is intolerable in a way that goes far deeper than simple jealousy or nostalgia. The third thing that happens, and this is where the actual behavior starts to shift from internal discomfort into external action, is what I'd call the recalibration trigger. Because a narcissist doesn't typically resurface the moment they notice you're doing better. There's usually a specific event, sometimes small, sometimes larger, that finally pushes discomfort into action. It might be seeing a photo of you looking genuinely happy, genuinely at peace, in a way that contradicts whatever story they've been telling themselves and others about how devastated or unstable you supposedly are. It might be hearing through the grapevine that you've started seeing someone new, or that you got a promotion, or that you seem, by every visible measure, to be thriving. It might simply be a quiet moment where their own current source of supply isn't quite hitting the same way it used to, and their mind, almost reflexively, drifts back to the last reliable source they had, the one they haven't tested in a while, the one who used to always respond. Whatever the specific trigger, the underlying mechanism is the same. Something confirms that you're no longer available in the way you used to be, and that confirmation, counterintuitively, is exactly what makes reaching out feel urgent again. And this is exactly where things get genuinely important to understand, because what happens next reveals something about the entire structure of how narcissists relate to the people they've hurt. Something that explains not just why they come back, but why the timing always seems to align so precisely with the moments you least expect it, the moments you finally, genuinely, started to let your guard down. That's exactly where we're going next. So let's pick up exactly where we left off, because what happens next is the piece that finally explains why the timing of their return always feels so uncannily precise, and why it almost always seems to arrive right when you've stopped bracing for it. The fourth thing that happens is what I'd call the test run approach, because here's something important to understand about how a narcissist re-enters a life they've been absent from. It's rarely a full, direct, vulnerable reach. It's almost always calibrated, tentative, designed to gather information before committing to anything real. This is why the first contact after a long silence so often looks deceptively small. A like on an old photo, a comment that seems random, unrelated to anything, dropped on a post from months ago. A just thinking of you text that arrives with no context, no explanation, no acknowledgement of the time that's passed or the harm that happened before the silence began. These aren't accidents, and they aren't clumsy attempts at reconnection. They're reconnaissance. Each one is a small, low-risk probe designed to answer a single question. Is there still a door here, even slightly open? And if so, how much effort will it take to widen it? And this is exactly where your response, or lack of one, becomes so critical, because the entire test run approach depends on getting some kind of data back. Even a small one, even an annoyed one. Because remember what we established earlier, that almost any reaction, positive or negative, functions as evidence of ongoing relevance in a narcissist's internal accounting system. If you respond with anger, that's data. If you respond with a brief, polite reply just to be mature about it, that's data too, and often more encouraging data than you'd expect. Because politeness gets read, rightly or wrongly, as an opening rather than a boundary. The only response that genuinely fails to provide the information they're searching for is no response at all. Sustained, consistent, uninterrupted silence. Because silence doesn't confirm or deny anything about the state of the door. It simply refuses to participate in the test. The fifth thing that happens, assuming the test run gets any kind of encouraging signal at all, even an ambiguous one, is escalation into what I'd call the redemption narrative. This is where the messages start to shift from vague and testing to something that sounds, on the surface, remarkably like genuine growth. Suddenly there's talk of therapy, of reflection, of finally understanding what they did wrong, of being a different person now than the one who hurt you. And I want to be very direct about something here, because this stage is, without question, the most dangerous one in the entire sequence, precisely because it's designed to sound exactly like the thing you've spent so much time hoping, somewhere in the back of your mind, they might eventually become. It taps directly into a very human, very understandable desire. The desire for the story to have a redemptive ending, for the pain to have ultimately produced growth, for the person who hurt you to have finally become capable of the love you always knew somewhere they might be capable of. But here's what's essential to hold on to in this exact moment, because it's the difference between recognizing a genuine, hard-won change and falling for a highly convincing performance of one. Genuine growth, the kind that would actually justify reconsidering any form of renewed contact, does not typically announce itself immediately upon realizing you've become unreachable. It doesn't conveniently surface right when your healing has made you interesting again. Real accountability, real therapeutic work, real internal change happens on its own timeline, driven by internal motivation rather than external loss. And critically, it doesn't require an audience to prove itself. If someone has genuinely done the work, that work exists, whether or not you're there to witness it, whether or not you ever respond to a single message again. The version of growth that surfaces specifically timed to your silence, specifically packaged to sound appealing enough to break through it, is not growth. It's the most sophisticated version of the same original pattern, simply wearing new, more convincing language. Now, I want to address something that I think deserves real attention here, because it's the part of this entire dynamic that causes the most confusion and the most self-doubt for people going through it. If you find yourself genuinely tempted by this redemption narrative, if some part of you wants to believe it, wants to respond, wants to give them one more chance to prove it's real, I need you to understand that this temptation is not a character flaw. It's not evidence that you're weak or that you didn't really heal as much as you thought you did. It's evidence that you're human, and that hope, especially hope for a story to end well, is one of the most persistent and understandable things a person can feel, even after everything. The goal here isn't to eliminate that temptation entirely through sheer willpower. The goal is to recognize it clearly enough that you can hold it without acting on it, understanding that the timing alone, arriving right as your healing became visible, right as your availability decreased, is itself the most reliable piece of evidence you have about what's actually driving this return. So let's bring this all the way back to the question we started with today, because understanding this entire 5-stage sequence, the loss of supply, the recalibration trigger, the test run, and finally, the redemption narrative, answers something that probably felt confusing or even a little unsettling the first time you noticed this pattern in your own life. Your healing didn't make the narcissist come running back, because healing made you more lovable in some way they finally recognized. It made you come running back into their radar, because healing changed the one thing their entire system was built to track: your emotional availability, your accessibility, your usefulness as a source of impact and validation. That's not a romantic story. It's not proof that they finally see your worth. It's simply a mechanical response to a mechanical shift, the same way a plant turns toward light, not out of appreciation for the light itself, but because turning toward it is the only thing its structure knows how to do. And here's what I really want you to walk away with today, because I think it's the most important reframe available in this entire conversation. The fact that your healing triggered their return is not evidence that healing was somehow the wrong move, or that staying broken would have kept them at a safer distance. It's actually the opposite. It's proof that your healing was real enough, visible enough, threatening enough to their entire system that it couldn't simply be ignored. Their return isn't a reward you've earned by getting better. It's an unintended side effect of getting better, one that says everything about how fragile their system is, and absolutely nothing about whether you should let them back into the life you've worked so hard to rebuild without them. Because here's the truth underneath everything we've covered today. You don't owe anyone access to the peace you fought to build. especially not the person whose absence made that peace possible in the first place. Their sudden interest in who you've become is not an invitation you're required to accept. It's simply information, useful information, about exactly how much your growth mattered, filtered through a system that will only ever interpret that growth as something to reclaim rather than something to genuinely respect. And once you can see it that clearly, the door that used to feel so hard to keep closed starts to feel like exactly what it always should have been. Simply closed. Not because you're bitter, not because you're incapable of forgiveness, but because the life on this side of that door was never actually waiting for them to come back into it at all. If this gave you clarity about something that's confused you recently, or the strength to keep that door closed the next time it gets tested, know that you're far from the only one navigating this exact moment. And there's a lot more we can work through together as we go. Make sure you're subscribed because we go deeper into this every single week.